What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kick-Ass Podcast. We are here today to discuss the fourth and final installment of the four-part docuseries, Who Killed WCW, airing on Vice TV. Obviously, we are in a little bit of change of scenery here for the Kick-Ass Podcast. I am here, I guess you could say on site for work. Nothing wrestling related, unfortunately. That'd be way too cool, right? But just for the full time, doing a little bit of training here out in Cleveland. But I did get a chance to watch the fourth and final episode of the docuseries, and as a whole, I think I'll probably just touch base on this really quick. Well, before I do that, I just want to say first, thank you guys as always for checking out the podcast. I truly appreciate it. I appreciate all the feedback that I've gotten regarding the little mini four-part series here. And I may look into doing something a little bit similar in the future. And I've actually been thinking about doing like a little bit of like a retro rewind type thing. Not really sure what I'm gonna call it yet or anything, but I've just been diving down like some nostalgia and like some old pay-per-views of mine that were a favorite. And especially with the WCW vibe and theme kind of been going on lately, and especially with the invasion that they referenced in episode 3 and in episode 4 as well. I think it'd be pretty cool maybe to do a little kind of like backtrack and go towards or go back from the beginning, right? Where WCW had its final Nitro, right? The infamous episode, which we'll be discussing here in a little bit, with Shane McMahon airing on Nitro and things like that. And so I think it'd be really cool to kind of maybe start from there. If you guys let me know what you guys think, of course, in the comments or on Twitter at Kickash Podcast _ or my personal Twitter page at ASHMANNS. But I was thinking maybe doing a starting point there, or if you guys think maybe a little bit further back, and just go from there and address the whole WCW invasion, their first night at WrestleMania 17 when they were sitting in the what are they called? Oh, those like skybox, like where all the VIP people congregate and everything like that. So I thought it'd be cool, just kind of an idea. So let me know if you guys would be interested in that or something similar or not at all. But like I said, thank you guys so much again for checking out the show. I truly appreciate it. I'm sorry if the audio and the visuals or any of that good stuff isn't as great, or at least as you're used to here. But like I said, I'll be going back home thankfully in a couple days, so I'm very excited for that. And things will be back to normal. But like I said, this obviously is in regards to what is sadly the final episode of the four-part docu-series of Who Killed WCW on Vice TV. And as always, I will be referencing. I made some notes of my own because I actually watched the episode, well, 1.5 times. I'm not going to say twice. But I will be referencing 411mania.com, the great author Robert Leidy Jr., of course, authored and penned this final recap here. So again, big kudos and shout out to him. I truly appreciate all the work that he's put into this series and the recaps that he's done and the way he broke it down. Again, if you guys have never come across 411mania.com in the past, and obviously you're fans of wrestling, if you're listening to this, I definitely recommend checking it out. Like I've said before, unless you're new here, I'm not really one of those people that's big on like dirt sheets or anything like that, or spoilers or anything like that. So I normally stay and steer clear of wrestling websites. To be honest with you guys, my main go-to is Twitter, as good or bad as that is. But I just want to give credit where credit is due, and I will be throwing the link for this transcription here and to give proper credit to Mr. Leidy. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right in the notes. So you'll see that on YouTube if you want to read and kind of check things out for yourself, or if you just want to reference it later, but it will be in the show notes as well. But I will be looking off to kind of a little bit of different setup, obviously here. So I will be reading off my phone here. So have a look to the side. That's just me reading my notes and reading the great transcription that Mr. Leidy did. But again, guys, just kind of backtracking a bit before we get into episode 4. As a whole with the series, I, again, was very impressed. I think that, like I've said before, I love the fact that they got a lot of the big names and the big wigs in it. And the people that you need to hear from, like your Janie Ingalls, your Teddy Turners, right? I'm still just blown that they got him in there. And then your other people as well, which will your Stu Snyder and things like that. So we'll be getting into that. I'll address those individuals once we kind of get to their part in this fourth and final scene. But in regards to the 4-part series as a whole, like I said, I think it was very well done, and I love. Obviously, they don't have access to a lot of the footage, right? Because WWE owns pretty much damn near all of WCW's footage. But we did get a nice surprise at the beginning of the show here, which we'll be referencing. So we were able to get some actual footage from the last Nitro that aired on Turner Broadcasting stations. But yeah, so I think that was really cool. And like I said, we'll be getting into that as well. I will say I was a little disappointed when kind of looking back now in regards to when they were speaking about the hype for WCW and what was the main or what were maybe the foundation points or some things that got WCW up and running. Of course, it's a no-brainer. Hulk Hogan, NWO, things like that were the main focal point, right? And the main driving point and the main substance of their show and their content going on. But there was really almost no mention of like the cruiserweight division and how big of a role they played. And that may seem kind of petty or minute or whatever, but to me, it really played a big deal, and it really added substance to the show and carried their shows, their weekly nitros and thunders when it got to that point, and it kept it going. And your wrestlers like your Eddie Guerreros, your Rey Mysterio Juniors, your Dean Malenkos, your Crispin Walls, your guys like that, your Juventud Guerrera, they didn't get nowhere near the credit that they deserved in this docuseries. And again, I understand the direction of the show was who killed WCW, and clearly the cruiserweight division had no part in killing it, right? But at least in regards to the beginning portion of the series, like episode 1, 2, when we were discussing the build and how WCW started and what really promoted them into popularity and really helped them like springboard to even begin competing with WWE, I think that the cruiserweight division deserves some love, and they may have mentioned it once or twice, and I know even in the logo they have Rey Mysterio Jr. in there as well. So obviously they are giving them a little bit of credit, but to me, I just would have maybe expected a little bit more and just expected a little bit more attention to it, because not for nothing, they say what you want. Like, you guys, if you've listened before, you know me. I am not a hater on Eric Bischoff. I have mad respect for the dude, and especially after watching this four-part series, I think that he in whatever you want to call it, he at least took accountability for a lot of the shit that he did, a lot of mistakes that he made, a lot of shit that didn't make sense and that shouldn't have aired and shouldn't even have happened to begin with. He at least took accountability for it, you know what I mean? Or if he wasn't necessarily involved in it or wasn't the one who created the idea, he at least admitted, he was like, yeah, that wasn't my idea. I didn't come up with it, but hey, I was the president, I was the top dog, I was whatever, and I allowed it to happen. So allowing it to happen is pretty much advocating for it type shit, you know what I mean? So I respect that. Like, we all make mistakes, we all make dumb fucking ideas. I know I have. And shit that, wow, like if I was looking back on it, I'd be like, that's fucking dumb. Like, why would you do that? You know what I mean? So I respect that. We didn't get accountability from everyone who was on here, and like I've said before in the previous episodes, I don't hate Vince Russo either. I think I respect all of his contributions, and I even mentioned before how he was one of the only head bookers who actually paid attention to the mid card and the lower card, and actually paid attention to wrestlers who either didn't have a character or were still trying to find their character and really hone it and hone their craft. And he actually gave them a storyline. He gave them some substance to work off of, right? So I have mad respect for that too. Like, I'm not a hater, you know what I mean? But at the same token, I'm not afraid to say when I think some accountability should have been had, or some shit is just dumb or just flat out bullshit. And for whatever reason, in my opinion, Vince Russo just doesn't take accountability for it. Like, nowhere in there did he say, yeah, I wrote this script, I wrote this storyline, it shouldn't have happened, it was a bad idea, it is, my bad type shit. But it just didn't happen. And again, do I think Vince Russo killed WCW? Absolutely not. Did I think he had a big part in making the TV show suck and tanking the ratings and definitely not turning the company around? Absolutely. Absolutely. But as we'll get into here in a second, a lot of people had a lot of hands into that. And I wasn't even aware of the potential conspiracy theory. And I love me a good conspiracy theory. I love documentaries. I'm that person to see something and go down a rabbit hole, right? So it's probably why I love these documentaries, or this documentary to begin with as well. But so we'll obviously be definitely talking about that, but I was very surprised. And again, that's probably something that's already been out there and not news to you guys, but it was news to me. So with all that being said, I'll get into a little bit more of my thoughts throughout the show here, but I want to dive right into it. I don't want to hold you guys too long. But of course, final episode is titled none other than The Final Nitro. And this one, I remember watching this live as it happened, and I'll never forget seeing Shane McMahon show up. And again, like I've mentioned before, I was always a WWF person. I would flip maybe back and forth a couple times between WWF and WCW. But for the longest time, I didn't even know WCW existed until I went up to New Jersey and hung out with some of my friends up there. And that's when I discovered, oh shit, there's another wrestling show on. Like, what is this about? So, but again, for whatever reason, I've just always had WWF, WWE, like in my blood type thing, you know what I mean, or whatever. So they've just always been my go-to. But I do remember watching this. Well, obviously I was watching Raw at the time, but I do remember this happening, and obviously I've gone back since then and watched the final Nitro itself in its entirety, thanks to the WWE Network. But I will just never forget seeing Shane on WCW and just thinking, like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what? Like, why are you over there? Like, weren't you just, like, I just remember just being so confused as a kid. And that was part of the whole point, right? Is to build intrigue and to build a foundation and a starting point for what was to become the invasion angle. And that's why I think, and to be completely honest, and which is why I'm kind of intrigued and a little excited to potentially do the invasion storyline as another series, kind of stemming off of this, and making its own playlist, is because I'm one of those crazy people that enjoyed the invasion pay-per-view. Again, I was 10, I think. 01, 02. Yeah, I was about 10, 11 when the invasion angle happened, and I just thought it was the coolest shit ever. I was like, what the fuck is happening? Like, why are these wrestlers coming in? Like, why are they messing with my favorites? Like, why is RVD? Like, why does he hate Jeff Hardy? Like, all this shit, you know what I mean? Because Jeff Hardy's my dude. The Hardy Boys are my guys, and obviously Team Extreme with Lita. But Jeff was always my guy, man. Jeff was my dude. So when him and RVD started fighting, and I'll never forget how pissed I was when RVD beat Jeff Hardy for the Hardcore Championship. Fucking live it, man. Fucking live it. I'll never let that go. But with all that good stuff out of the way, we're going to get right into the episode here. So again, thank you guys for checking out the show. And again, I hope the audio isn't too terrible. I know there's maybe a little bit of muffling, so I'm trying not or just like a little bit of static or something when the little mic on the headset there is touched. So I'm going to try not to touch that guy too much. As odd as that sounds to you all. But getting right into the episode here, like I stated before, it's titled The Final Nitro, which is apropos. The beginning of the episode starts with a disclosure, and it reads, "This episode contains footage filmed by cameraman Scott Lansing that documents the final days of Nitro. It has never been seen by the public until now." And immediately, from jump, I'm hooked. Not that I wasn't already, but I'm just like, oh, this is good shit. Like, what does Scott film, you know? And you can tell it was something that he was probably ahead of his time, you know. I'm sure clearly Eric Bischoff wasn't at the final Nitro, so I'm sure no one went up to him and was like, "Hey, dude, like record everything from this final day, from this final Nitro. Like, make sure you just, even if it seems like nothing, just film people coming in, film people leaving, film people going into the ring, out of the ring, just walking around, film them putting the logos up, film them putting the signs up, setting up the ring, just anything, you know, just document everything for the last Nitro." And I'm very thankful he did. So shout out to Scott Lansing for the work you did there, sir. You were ahead of your time, and we appreciate you. Or if the world doesn't, I appreciate you. Here at the Kick-Ass Podcast, we appreciate you. But again, definitely in a situation like this, where obviously the rights and the product and I had a quick pop up, but everything related to WCW is WWE property now. This was a cool little insight and a cool little tidbit that we have here. And I know if we got, I would say probably 10, 15 minutes total, and the footage, maybe even a little bit longer, in total of the footage that we had that aired from Scott Lansing. I'm sure the dude has like fucking like an hour and a half or 2 hours, if not even more, right? Because you think if he was there filming the whole day, gosh, the crew normally gets there early in the morning, right? Probably like 8, 9, 10 o'clock. Well, not 10 o'clock, early in the morning, like 8, 9. I know when I was in Richmond at the Coliseum, the crew would get there mad early in the morning. And especially depending on what type of event you have, they'd get there maybe even a day or two prior to that. But generally, if it's just like a TV taping or a TV show, they get there same day, early in the morning. And then your wrestlers start coming in like around 12, 1, 2 o'clock. So the fact that he got a lot of footage and a lot of wrestlers airing, that tells you that dude probably has a shit ton more. And I doubt it's property of WWE, because I doubt that they would even be able to air this or air the footage that they did. Because if they had WWE's blessings to air the footage to begin with, I'm sure there would have been a lot more footage aired. I'm sure there would have been more wrestlers aired. Um, but and as I'm speaking about that and thinking out loud, you do have Booker T, who is a contracted talent with WWE. I'm not sure if he's on like a Legends deal or whatever, but he's still employed and contracted with WWE at this time. So the fact that he was able to go out there and still film the series was pretty cool. Obviously, I don't believe Eric Bischoff is under any type of contract with WWE right now. Actually, I know he's not, because of all the shit he talks about AEW on his YouTube page. So he's definitely not affiliated with WWE right now. But yeah, you got a good feeling for the vibe behind the scenes. And I believe it was Medusa at one point during the show. She was like, the wrestlers were going out there and doing the best they could to put out a good show. They would be like moping backstage and just like so defeated and just so unsure of what's gonna happen next. But the second they walked through that curtain and their music hit, it was like night and day, right? They would go out there, put on a kick-ass show, do what they did for all of us fans, and then the second they came back to the curtain, again, just almost like a night and day type thing again. So, and that's sad, We're going to get into a few other things regarding like jobs and stuff like that later on during the show. But that disclaimer right there just completely hooked me. So shout out to them. I don't know why I'm snapping tonight. I don't know why I'm fucking snapping. But after the disclaimer that we got there, that's when the first scene from the footage from Scott Lansing showed. We were behind the scenes with the final Nitro at Panama City Beach. Chris Kanyon, which it was so cool to see Chris Kanyon again too. Like that dude, he again was ahead of his time, and we'll have to maybe do a deeper dive into Chris Kanyon and all the heartbreak that came with him, and how his career ended up ending in his life, unfortunately. That's a whole story to unpack, so not going to get into that right now. We did see a young Jimmy Yang. If you guys remember WWE back in the day, Jimmy Wang Yang. It was very cool to see him. And then we saw Dustin Rhodes. It's just amazing how, when you think of just the longevity and everything Dustin Rhodes has been throughout his career, like it's just, I hope he writes a book one day. I would definitely pick that up. But they were some of the people providing sound bites from that day. Booker T says he can only imagine how much money went out the window. And in regards to that, they were discussing, obviously, WCW was beating WWE for WWF at the time for 83 weeks straight, right? Hence Eric Bischoff's podcast, 83 weeks. But with all that success and all that momentum and all the money streaming and pouring in, they mentioned at one point that WCW was making like $100 million a year, or on paper they were making $100 million a year. But Booker T is like, if you're making all this money, like where is it going? Because obviously, if you're making all this money, like hundreds of millions of dollars every year, you wouldn't be going out of business, which on paper makes a lot of sense. But Eric Bischoff has always said, and like I'm not sure if I mentioned in a previous episode, there was this, oh my gosh, what was it? OPIDA? I forget the acronym for it, but it was essentially, and I'm sure we'll mention it here as well. It was one of those things where WCW was pretty much like a separate property for Turner Broadcasting, and they were able to allocate a lot of funds and a lot of losses onto the WCW books. Now, whether that's 100% true or not, obviously I don't fucking know, right? But that's always been the story that Eric Bischoff has stuck with since I've ever listened to an interview for him, like decades ago. So I remember there was this one episode that he did, or not episode, but this one podcast that he did with Wade Keller years ago. I don't even remember the year, but he mentioned it back then as well. So this isn't something like, oh, that's convenient, And I feel like I'm like a Eric Bischoff like shill or some shit, and I don't mean to be, but it's just, I like to think that I call shit black and white as I see it, and again, like I give respect where it's due, but I give bullshit where it's due too, But moving on, Eric Bischoff says that things in Turner Broadcasting were more dysfunctional than ever before. That leads us going back into 2000 with the AOL Time Warner merger. And looking back on it, especially obviously as a fan back then, I never realized how big of an impact and a detriment to WCW that merger really created for the company, which is just really unfortunate. And yeah, just if you guys that are watching this are, I'm dating myself, if you're too young to know what AOL dial-up internet was, be thankful. I still have flashbacks to that noise, and that's just stuck in the back of my head. Yeah, the dial-up sound was just fucking, I'll never forget that dial-up sound. It's just ingrained in your brain. AOL shareholders got 55% of the new company and Time Warner 45%. Teddy Turner, again, obviously, Ted Turner's son, says his father, Ted Turner, never owned a cell phone, never touched a computer, or was ever online in his life. He never even used an ATM. Obviously, don't need a fucking ATM if you're a billionaire. He was advised that he would never, or he could never turn down. Oh, what happened? There we go. Sorry about that. He was advised that he could never turn in down because of all the money. Teddy says it was a Ponzi scheme and was going to all fall down. Sorry, a little bit I've noticed when I was kind of reading the article first, a little bit's kind of like grammatically not straight, so I apologize in advance. But yeah, it is what it is. Beggars can't be choosers, right? WCW was no longer a hit every night, and Brad Siegel, which says he was trying to fix it and do whatever he could to get him back on track. That's false. The wrestlers note that it was a chaotic shit show and that they had to start looking out for themselves. Brad Siegel was not a wrestling person, and he admits he could not fix it. They kept losing money, and they discuss how Uncensored in 1999 had 325,000 buys, and in 2000 the same show had 60,000 buys. And both shows main evented those pay-per-views with Hogan versus Flair. And again, and I'm not going to get into the AEW thing, but that's why people get concerned with AEW numbers and ratings, right? But I think it's where they say apples and oranges in that regard. And again, I'm not going to get into that, but there was a comment that I saw on Twitter. It was like, I forget the amount of time, but it was like a certain amount of shows at this point, and AEW will have aired more broadcast television than WCW did. And Eric Bischoff had some type of quit back, of course, but it's just crazy to think about. But yeah, again, I'm going to try not to get into that right now. Eric Bischoff says the narrative is that WCW, here we go, had losses of 62 million in 2000, and there is a grain of truth. However, people don't understand the why. He thinks other divisions had losses and they were pushed to WCW because they knew it could be written off there once the company was shuttered. Once others backed up, and there was some, that's kind of worded really, but essentially like other people were backing him, right? And backing that notion. Eric asked Brad Siegel to let him explore selling WCW while it still had some value. Brad laughed as they didn't sell things, they bought them. And that was kind of the mindset with Turner, right? We're not going to sell things, we buy them, we make them better, and we profit. My words. We moved to WCW where on January 11th, the FCC approves the merger of AOL and Time Warner. It took a year to get the approval, and by that point, AOL was being predicted to be a DOA, which is a death on arrival, which clearly that wasn't the case. They discussed the dot-com bubble exploding, which affected AEW. God, AOL. The stock price dropped 50%, and that meant suits were looking at what divisions were bleeding money and could be cut. Ted was standing there to protect WCW, but he was given an executive role in name only. Brad said Time Warner didn't need to own a wrestling company, and that was losing money. So again, Brad Siegel, I try to give him props. I try to give him credit. And I will say, at one point, I'm not sure if it's listed in the rundown here, but I know I put it in my notes and it just stuck out of my brain, obviously. But while clearly he wasn't the dude who should have been put in charge of running a wrestling company, right? And because he even said at one point, he doesn't know how to write storylines. He doesn't know creative. He doesn't know the business. He's an executive. Why the fuck would you put him in place to run a wrestling company? I'll never understand. But that's part of the conspiracy theory, right? That we'll get to later on. But I will give him credit and at least acknowledge that he acknowledged and admitted that he didn't know what the fuck he was doing and that he should not have been the one to run it. And he just didn't know what he was doing. So I respect that. You know what I mean? Like, I gave you props for admitting you don't know what the fuck you're doing and you were part of the problem. Eric Bischoff says Brad called him a few months later and asked if he could find a buyer for WCW. Eric called Peter Gruber, founder and CEO of Mandalay Entertainment Group, and he wasn't but he wasn't interested, but he knew people who would be interested at the time. Enter Steven Greenberg and Brian Badal, who were co-founders of Fusion Media Ventures. Fusion created the Classic Sports Network, which became ESPN Classic Sports. Yeah. And he's just adding, the author's just adding some notes in there. But Fusion Media funded them money and raised $62 million. Again, the grammar's just not great. I don't mean to throw shade, but it's just not that great in the typos. Again, no stones at glass houses, right? Eric says the pro wrestling industry is indestructible and it's just a matter of the company being in the right hands. I do agree with that. Eric Bischoff says they had a loose plan of what they were going to do when the deal went through. They went to Vegas, and this was really cool because as he's explaining this, they splice in some footage of what the Hard Rock Hotel looked like at the time in Las Vegas and where they were planning on holding the shows up. Kind of a similar vibe to what WCW did in the early days, holding their weekly television at, not even weekly, like they would sometimes even air a good amount or film a good amount of shows in the Universal Studios down in Florida. I wish I would be going on currently, right? It's right in my backyard. But that's smart, right? Yes, you do run in the opportunity of not attracting a diehard wrestling fan and your diehard fan base and just having casuals come in and out and not really being invested in the product, maybe giving some not great response while they're in the crowd or just not even paying attention at all. But you do get a weekly influx of different crowds and different people that you could potentially attract and different buyers you could potentially attract. And you save a shit ton of money in logistics, traveling, being able to get shit done. And gosh, I think I'm not in this documentary, but I remember hearing at one point like they were doing like 2, 3, 4 episodes in a day, 2 days sometimes, and you could crank that out for a month, right? So just think of all the traveling that you're saving money on and all that shit because it adds up really fucking quick. So with this, they were going to go to Vegas and pretty much air and showcase and broadcast a show rather out of the Hard Rock Hotel, who were willing to build actually a 3,500 seat entertainment theater on top of the roof of their parking garage to hold the shows, which is a fucking massive commitment too, especially in Vegas. The idea was to bring WCW back with a pay-per-view called The Big Bang. And they actually showed pretty much just like a logo and a concept that they have for the pay-per-view and pretty much like marketing material that they had already created for it. The deal was seemingly all set and the price was $62 million. Again, we hear audio of Vidal talking. They put audio of Vidal talking about working with Eric, and their goal was to be number one again and win 100 weeks in a row. And again, in that point too, and during the actual documentary, there's an audio recording of him, like on I guess it was a phone call or something, obviously. But I don't know if it was like a conference call, or if it was just a one-on-one call, or whatever it was. But of him specifically saying that, you can hear the determination too. Like he really wanted to own WCW. He wanted it to be the number one company in the world, period. And props to you, bro. And that's the mindset that you should have. If you have a company and you're looking to buy it, why the fuck would you want it to be number two? Even if in the back of your mind, you know, like you're going up against a juggernaut who has an advantage, you still have to thrive. You still have to have a goal. You still have to have something egging you on and motivating you on. So he again was one of the I think a very good option to buy and help facilitate the deal for WCW. Entering Conan. Conan thinks they were going to see a fresher and smarter version of Eric running the company. Eric says Turner Broadcast guaranteed them a time slot on Monday night and Thursday night. They were leaving advertisers up to Eric and his group, but they were scheduled to close they were scheduled to close the deal. Now, the key with that recap right there is Turner Broadcast guaranteed them a time slot on Monday night and Thursday night, which is obviously primetime television, right? 8 to 10. If you don't have TV, you're fucked. Now, again, nowadays, you're not. Back in the early 2000s and the late 90s, you're fucked if you don't have TV. There was no streaming, no like, oh, let's film this and throw it on YouTube. None of that shit. So, like he said, and I've heard this again multiple times, Eric has gone on record, I know, at least a handful of times, that WCW was worth $20 without a television deal at that point. And he's right. You know, not literally 20, no, but pennies to the dollar. And it sounds like bullshit, right? But it's the truth. If you don't at that time have broadcasting, you don't have a publication to disperse and get your product out there, what's the point of even having it? Which is unfortunate. March 6, 2001. Jamie Kellner, rest in peace to him, is named as CEO of Turner Broadcasting. Jamie was credited with the huge growth of Fox Network and a founder of WB Network. Jamie said Turner was a great company and his goal was to not mess things up. Brad tells us that Jamie hated pro wrestling. He didn't get or understand it and wanted nothing to do with it. Brad said he made the suggestion to sell WCW, and Jamie said to get rid of it as fast as he can. Thanks, Brad. March 16th. Brad sends a memo telling WCW employees there will be a hiatus. A few days later, no hiatus and wrestling is being canceled on Turner, ending a decades-long tradition. That's a pretty brief recap there, but they did show there's a few newspaper articles as well showing that WCW was going on a hiatus, then potentially closing its doors. And that's just, it sucks because WCW definitely could have kept going for probably a decent amount of time, 3, 4, 5 years at least, if they A, had broadcast network, right? And B, had someone who believed in the fucking company and didn't have someone coming in, taking over and cutting it out at the knees and just pretty much just chopping it up and leaving it for the wolves to come get, you know? Sorry if that's graphic, but it's just shitty what happened there. Eric Bischoff says they were ready to close the deal, and Brian called him and said it was done. Eric thought that meant the deal was done, but instead it was off the table. Eric blames Kellner as he was the head dog and didn't want his primetime hours cluttered with pro wrestling. WCW relied heavily on television, and again, here's a quote. As Eric famously said, without TV, WCW was only worth $20. And the editor has a note in here, the real money was in the tape library, and Vince was set up best to use that, as we found out, which obviously, yeah. But that comment's like, yeah, no shit. Like, if you're the only dog in the industry, you're the biggest dog in the game, like, obviously you're going to get, whatever. But, yes, was the real money in the TV library? Absolutely. You got to think that shit went back to the late 80s, right? The early 80s with the library footage that they had. And the rings. They got a lot of stuff. They got the rings, some of the, those big wrestling banners, like the pay-per-view banners are massive, that when you hang on the wall, it takes up half the wall. They acquired a whole bunch of those, and it's really cool because when you go to WWE Access or WrestleMania or SummerSlam or things like that, you see them and they display them everywhere. So it's really cool. So again, is that important? Absolutely not. But to me as a wrestling fan, it's pretty fucking cool. But yeah, the fact that you promise them, or you almost guarantee that, yeah, if you can find a buyer for the company, we guarantee that you'll have a time slot on primetime TV on Mondays and Thursdays. Even if you didn't want to give them both days, you could at least guaranteed one, right? If you don't want to give up Monday night, you can give up Thursday night because you already had that time and that time slot allotted for, right? You had Thursday night Thunder, 8 to 10. Why, devil's advocate, you could have knocked it down to an hour. If you hate wrestling that much, you could have knocked it down to an hour. I don't understand the vitriol and the disgust and I gotta get off my television broadcasting network right now. Gotta get off this channel right now. Clearly it's been there for years. You had no issue when it was making money for you, hand over fist, but now all of a sudden, I don't want this shit on my TV. So fuck off, man. That. It's upsetting because it costs so many people their jobs, and it costs so many people grief and probably mental anguish and just uncertainty. And it's so sad because at one point in the documentary they mentioned, yes, the wrestlers, right? The wrestlers are a no-brainer, but you have people who aren't easily able to go up there and pick out another job. You have your contractors, your independent contractors, right? Your true independent contractors, your cameraman, your production staff, your TV crew. You're all obviously cameraman and TV crew, but I mean your production staff behind the scenes. You have your ring crew, right? You have your travel facilities. You have everyone who works backstage. They aren't known. It's not like you can go out there and be like, oh yeah, Roman Reigns, come on over here. Sting, come on over here. I don't know why I said Roman Reigns. He was just an example, right? But your Stings, you keep it to WCW. Your Stings, your Hulk Hogan's, your Kevin Nash's, your Booker T's, all those. Now, granted, Booker did end up taking a buyout and ended up coming over earlier, which was smart for him. But it could have gone obviously a different way. And in a lot of ways, everything happened maybe as it should have, but I think it still could have been prolonged. And I think we still could have gotten a lot of greatness out of it. And I think we could have gotten a lot more spotlight, and had they truly sold the company and let Eric Bischoff take over the reins again, and not just him, but all and the company that wanted to take over WCW and make it thrive, because they wanted to buy the company and make Eric Bischoff the president of it. And with that Big Bang pay-per-view, they were going to pretty much like a clean slate and a fresh start. And they just scrapped it. Because like you said, if you don't have broadcasting, you don't have something to promote your show, what are you doing the show for, essentially? So, and again, I obviously understand, right? In the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was no TV, and the indie scene was the thing, right? But times are changing. Times are changing. And the way to have an industry thrive and to ensure it's set up for generations to come is to secure deals and to secure TV rights. And once TV and cable and broadcasting started becoming more popular and becoming a mainstay in family TV or in family households, how can you go from being on TV and being in primetime slots to nothing? You can't. You're fucked. You can't. Eric says they were ready to close, and Brian caught him and said it was done. Eric thought that meant the deal was done, but instead it was off the table. Eric blames Kellner, as he was the head dog and didn't want his primetime hours cluttered with pro wrestling. WCW relied heavily on television. I'm sorry, I'm guys rereading it. And Eric famously said, without TV, WCW was only worth $20. And again, he's not wrong there. $20, not specifically, but pennies to their dollar. Stu Snyder, former executive vice president of Turner Home Entertainment, says he grew up loving wrestling. And this was, again, another good coup. But this is inter-conspiracy. He grew up in New York and would go to shows at Madison Square Garden once a month. He's a wrestling fan at the core, and he worked at THE. Again, like this, I don't know. This sentence says he worked at THE and then left. Turner Home Entertainment. And I don't know, like, I wouldn't use the in all capital letters as an abbreviation. Like, just fucking spell out the word. And then he left and became president and CEO of WWF Entertainment. He wanted to grow the core business and made sure to keep up with what was happening behind the scenes at WCW. He had known Brad Siegel for a long time and made a call to him to see how things were going. Yeah, Brad, how's things going over at our competition? There's no conflict there. He told Brad they were interested if he ever needed to be. That makes no sense. I should just fucking read the shit myself. Pretty much he was saying that, I'll just go back to my notes. Pretty much he was saying that, hey, if you're ever interested, let's do something, bro, and he just didn't, it just set up a wrong connotation and a wrong vibe, right? And of course, it was very, very nice having Brad Siegel and Stu Snyder on for the documentary so they can address the accusations and address the questions dead on. And again, respect it. But I do want you, obviously, to watch the documentary, because I love to hear what you guys have to think about his Snyder's body language when they asked him a question, pretty much like, was there a conspiracy theory, or was it like an inside job type thing? Very interesting, especially if you're someone like me and is a nerd for like watching like body language experts like kind of depict people and stuff like that. Very fascinating. WWF was going to work hard to get a deal done. They knew there was another player as they pan over a graphic, May 6, 2001, the Big Bang, the creation of the new WCW. But they were focused on what they could offer. March 23rd, the unthinkable happens. WWF has purchased WCW. And again, think about that. So we go from March 19th, they have a show in Gainesville, Florida, and Eric Bischoff announces via phone to everyone that wait, did I skip an article? Oh, I did. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, so right before that, they were ready to close the deal, and when Brad called him and said that it was off the table on March 19th, Nitro had a show in Gainesville, Florida, which is crazy. All this shit happened in Florida. And Eric Bischoff announces via phone to everyone that he has been trying to buy WCW. They have hit roadblocks that may be brick walls, and next week could be the last night of wrestling on the Turner networks, which is so crazy. Obviously, I didn't watch that when it happened live. But as the audio was airing, they were showing, I think it was it Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan? But there were some wrestlers like out in the arena already out there. And as the audio from his phone call was airing, you're just kind of watching their reaction and their demeanor. And they were uncertain too of what the fuck was going to happen. I don't think it was Hogan actually. No, Hogan was already gone at that point, so it had to be Flair. Going back to the proper place. Yes, May 23rd, the unthinkable happens again. WWF announces they have purchased WCW. So that's why I was going back. So between March 19th and March 23rd, all this shit happens. They go from being uncertain and Eric Bischoff still trying to grind and vocal down and figure out a way to buy WCW with Fusion Media. And 4 days later, WWF slides in and snatches that shit, which plays into the conspiracy. How does that happen so quickly? How do they know what's going on the table, what's not on the table anymore, what the struggle has been? And Eric Bischoff and Fusion Media, they raised $62 million to buy WCW, and now all of a sudden we'll find out WCW was bought for $4.3 million, which is chump change to someone like Vince McMahon. How the fuck does that happen? How does that different valuation happen? And again, much smarter people out there know more than I do. I am just going to react emotionally here and say it's fucking absurd. And if that doesn't tell you right there that something fishy is going on, I don't know what else does. Again, back to March 26th now, which is the final episode of Nitro. So again, March 23rd, WWF announces they have purchased WCW. March 26th in Panama City is the final Nitro, which is obviously the key and the headline for tonight's show. We get more behind the scene footage, and it's pretty surreal to see, as the author says. They see the referees and wrestlers asking what is happening and then losing it when they see a rundown sheet and it starts with Vince McMahon vignette. Can you fucking imagine? Like, let's say you're Pepsi, right? Let's say you work for Pepsi, and obviously Coca-Cola is your number one competitor, right? Let's say a Thursday, you go into work, you hear that audio call, things are not looking too hot, not really sure who's going to be the new owner going forward. We're fighting to stay on TV, we're fighting to stay afloat, whatever. You come in 3 days later, Pepsi has a bulletin on there. I forget my own example. But the other company, Pepsi has a bulletin like, yo, motherfuckers, we're here. We're taking over this shit. We're starting off the quarter, the media call saying the owner of Pepsi is taking over, right? Can you imagine? Can you imagine being an employee there and just walking in and just seeing like your life is changing? Like, I personally couldn't. Oh, crazy shit. Vince McMahon starts to show on camera, and the author says that he can't put into words how much of an insane moment that was. And again, guys, if you haven't seen that episode of Raw, which is the go-home episode for WrestleMania 17, ironically enough, during that time frame, definitely go out of your way to watch it. Booker says nobody knew until that night. The Rock, randomly appears, says it felt like the end of the era. Goldberg said it sucked. Thank you. He didn't know if it was better for Vince to buy it and keep it going or to destroy it. And Cody notes that it was a lot of sadness and uncertainty, so pretty much across the board there. It was an emotional night, and Dusty was there. There were WWF signs, and they felt that it was a slap in the face, which there had been WWF signs prior. Like, come on. But earlier, we find out that Shane McMahon had a meeting with the staff to inform them that WWF owned the company now, and they credited the boys for performing. Oh, and then they credited the boys for performing when out in the ring. And that was what I was mentioning earlier, with Medusa saying that, the guys are pretty much just all fucking depressed, and then they hit the curtain, their music plays, and they just complete 180. So props to them, and props to all the guys and gals who went out there that night and put on a show when their lives are being just upended, and just, granted, a good amount of them had guaranteed contracts still for either a year to 2, 3 years at that point, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them didn't have that guaranteed money, and it's scary. It's I can only imagine. It was an emotional night, and Dusty was there. There were signs. Okay, going over that. This page just keeps fucking reloading with all these damn ads. Sorry for the potty mouth, guys. It has been a long day, and for full disclosure, I'm recording at 1 o'clock in the morning, so it's been a long day, and I have to get up in 5 hours, so whatever. Okay, yeah, it really put me up. Okay, here we go. back to it. So it was an emotional night, and Dusty was there. There were WWF signs, and they felt that it was a slap in the face. Shane had a meeting with the staff to inform them. Just read that part. They credit the boys for performing, went out in the ring. Booker says he and Scott Steiner had a conversation, and Booker said they were auditioning that night. We went out there and rocked it. Booker closes WCW as the WCW and US champion, and he felt that the WWF had eyes on him. And again, say what you want about Booker, right? Whether it's regarding some of the comments he's made on his own podcast or his commentary on NXT, he was smart. He saw the bigger picture. And again, was he getting paid the millions and millions and millions of dollars as your Goldberg, Stings, Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash's, Scott Hall's? Probably not. So it was a little bit easier for him to probably take that 50% payout for the contract there. But again, it's still a risk that you're taking, right? You have guaranteed money for X amount of time. You're taking a 50% cut going on with the competition that you've been going up against for X amount of weeks now and years now. And you're hoping and praying that they are impressed with you and they want to keep you on board, because they could easily fire you just as quick as they hired you. The shitty thing about an independent contractor is that when you have that contract, they could up and fire you. Now, yes, you'll have your 90-day clause and things like that, but you're not guaranteed unless you have that guaranteed contract. And it's just shitty. But I will always remember looking back and seeing Booker T jump the guardrail with that button-down open shirt that he had, punching Stone Cold, and then picking up for a backdrop, slamming him on the announce table. And I think that's when people said that he fucked up Stone Cold's back or some shit. Which sucks, just the shitty, I don't want to say like shitty luck, but like, what are the odds? Because it was a simple maneuver. Kevin Nash, good old Nash, who was high throughout the series, says it was pathetic that people showed up to be on the Titanic, which I don't agree with. He was happy to sit at home and watch the ship go down. Yeah, and the author here has, a bunch of idiots being professional and doing the jobs that they're being paid to do, suckers. And 100%, like, come on, bro. Come on. Not everyone had the millions and millions of guaranteed money that you did, so let's just not. Eric didn't watch as it happened live. He said he felt bad for the talent and the production staff. And you could see the emotion on Eric's face throughout this. And it's your baby, it's your baby. Imagine working your ass off for years, building and developing this product. And then all of a sudden it's ripped away from you. You're brought back in. You're kind of teased like, if you can raise X amount of money and find some partners to buy the show or the company rather, you can have it. And then we'll guarantee you some TV time. Couple of days later, oh, just kidding, you're not going to get TV time, so good luck to you. Can you imagine the emotional roller coaster? Because I definitely could not. They talk about the production guys and girls that have been working for WCW and NWA for nearly 30 years. DDP said, that's why I say, fuck you, Jamie Kellner. But rest in peace. We see photos of We see photos of the production crew, and it does suck that they all lost their jobs. That's what the author said. And then we see a member of the team start to break down and talk about losing the job and losing the friendships that they made, which, again, it sucks, bro. Yes, it happens in everyday life. I get it, but it still doesn't make it any better. Conan was shocked at how low the amount was that WWF paid for WCW. Eric won't say anything spooky happened, controversial-wise, but he has his suspicions. And again, they mentioned that, so $4 million, not 4.3, is what the article has here. But Guy Evans says that their peak WCW was generating over $200 million a year, and they were sold to WWF for $4 million. Some of the talking heads think it was an inside job. Kevin Sullivan thinks there was maybe an envelope pushed across the desk, kind of like mafia-style shit. And Eric says Stu Snyder was an executive at Turner and got a plum executive job at WWF. So again, makes you wonder. Bob Ryder, and when they mentioned Bob and bring him in, they showed a clip of him being attacked on Nitro by Tank Abbott. He was part of the WCW.com as a host. After the sale to WWF, he posted online that there had been a conspiracy at play. Eric calls Bob a good guy and a friend, and that the idea was Brad gave Jamie the idea to take the television out of the deal with Fusion so they would cancel and that they could sell to WWF to get WCW off Turner for good. Which is just fucking crazy, right? Because you think about it, and that's why I'm kind of torn on the conspiracy, because as a billionaire businessman, like, And yes, it obviously wasn't his sole decision. But if you and your company have the opportunity to make $62 million in one hand, just to guarantee, like, yeah, we'll give you some TV time. And again, you could have taken Monday night away. If you want that primetime slot on Mondays, take Monday away and just leave fucking Thursday or Friday and go back to Saturday morning at 6:05. Or Saturday evening at 6:05. Or do another Saturday morning show. So I'm torn because if a company has an opportunity to make $62 million and then they settle for $4 million, something obviously ain't, that math ain't mathing. That's all I'm gonna say. Something ain't aligned here. But regarding that, they discuss how Stu and Brad work together in I'm gonna back up a little bit. Bob Ryder, okay. Shown he was part of the WCW.com as a host. After the sale to WWF, he posted online that there had been a conspiracy at play. Eric calls Bob a good guy and a friend, and that the idea was Brad gave Jamie the idea. Again, I don't know with this article. That they would take the television deal out of the sale to Fusion. So pretty much it was just a shit show, a shit deal. They discuss how Stu and Brad work together, and this it's just driving me nuts, guys. Eric doesn't know if it's true, but they did have relationships in the past. Brad says that he has known Stu for their entire careers, but it was purely coincidence. I don't agree with that. Stu says he had no advanced knowledge that the Fusion Media deal was going to fall through, and says that from what he understands, Kellner is the one who wanted WCW off of Turner. Yes, but you guys gave him a kick in the nuts to do it. Just gonna say. They know that this would be illegal with the FCC and it would not be worth the risk of what they would lose. Eric says he just doesn't believe in the number of coincidences behind the situation. True that. Stu says he understands the gossip, but people don't understand the economics. If there was a deal for $60 million, he guarantees the Turner executives will have taken it. And again, I agree with that. That's what I just said. Brad says they wanted to salvage what they could and that they sold it for what it was worth. He regrets when ratings started to drop, but they could find, or that they thought that they could find the right people with story to get things back in track. And he just admitted that he couldn't do it and he couldn't figure out how to get it done. Which again, I respect the humility there. Stu doesn't think anything could have been done to save WCW without having a strong advocate who really understood the business, like an Eric Bischoff. Ted was the person that was their chief advocate, and he was no longer there advocating for them, essentially. They bring up that in the WWF, everyone knew where the buck stopped, and that was with Vince, and WCW never had anyone like that, and that had always been, and the author says that's always been a valid point, which I agree with. Obviously everyone knows Eric is the guy in charge, but apparently he wasn't good at making some decisions, which you need, I'm not even going to say what I was going to say, but you need a definitive figurehead. You need someone where, yes, you can maybe talk to X, Y, and Z and you'll get X, Y, and Z answers, but if you go to A over here, A is going to give you the end-all, be-all answer, and it is what it is. You can go back and talk to X, Y, and Z, but you're going with what A said. It is what, that's done deal. And does it suck sometimes? Yeah, but you need that stability and you need that in a company, especially if you're the top guy and you want to make money. The top guy meaning the top of the business itself. Stu says the WWF wasn't looking to buy something and kill it. The idea was to figure out how to keep it alive, and down the line it can be its own separate show again. So at one point, taking a step back, the idea was to have, ironically enough, and as crazy as it sounds, to have WCW take Monday Night Raw's place, and then to have Thursday Night SmackDown as like the WWF show. So they were ideally going to have WCW on Mondays and then WWF on Thursdays. Now, if they ended up switching that and obviously having your primetime show be your WWF show on Mondays, that would make more sense to me. I never understood why they would put WCW on Monday, but it is what it is, unless they're trying to keep the momentum and build off of that momentum. But at that point, they weren't even bringing in the bigger names. They had their Booker T's. They had, oh my gosh, what else did they bring in, like, big name-wise? DDP's. Goldberg didn't come in until 2003. So you were very limited. And that's not WWF's fault because they purchased WCW, but they weren't able to purchase the contracts because that was millions and millions of dollars. And they just weren't going to do that, which I don't blame them. And let's see. They jumped to the story of Shane buying WCW right from under Vince's nose. The Rock says he wrote down all the names of WCW he wanted to wrestle, guys like Sting, Goldberg, Savage, and the NWO guys. Whatever. Eric says that when WWF bought WCW, they did not get the contracts of the wrestlers. Some guys took the deals from WWF where they got 50 cents on the dollar. Goldberg says that was not happening to me, which I don't blame him either. Like, collect your millions and get back to it. But that's why I respect Booker T even more, because he referenced a quote that Ric Flair had said at one point, and Flair essentially said, like, absence is your enemy. So out of sight, out of mind type thing. Booker T says he had over a year left on his contract, and he took the 50% buyout and went to work with WWF. And here we go. Flair's told him years before that the time away was the enemy. So there's the direct quote. I hate when it freaking jumps like this. He wanted to see how he compared to the WWF guys. They discussed the invasion storyline and how the WCW side did not have the star power and to get it off the ground running. Conan thinks Vince missed the boat, but again, it wasn't Vince's fault. Like, he didn't have access to the top talent at the time. So what the fuck are you gonna do? Like, yeah, would the invasion angle been so much better if you had your Goldbergs, your Stings, your Flairs, your Hogans? Duh. But like, it wasn't available. So what are you gonna do? And that's why I just never understood why people shit so much on this invasion storyline, because was it great? No, but what other option did they have? Did they have the option to not do it? Yeah, but then what else are you going to do with all this influx of WCW and eventually ECW talent that you're getting into your show? You got to do something. So people just like to bitch sometimes, in my opinion. And again, was it great? No. And eventually, do we end up seeing a lot of the WWF guys go to WCW, the invasion side, right? Like your Stone Cold, your Kurt Angle? Yeah, but what else are you going to do to make it believable and to make it actually somewhat competitive? So it's like, yeah, like we have a lot of shit to bitch about, but this to me wasn't one of them. Let's see. All the big names came eventually, and WWE is still making buckets of money. Again, the author's just pointing that out. Nash brings up that WWF won the war and would write the history while treating them like the Confederate Army. They brought us in under the guise, this is going to work twice. I get to watch the wonderful experience of watching my friend who had been sober for 11 months go downstairs and start pounding drinks. WWE won the war and wanted to bury the flag and make sure everyone knew they won. Regarding that, so when the NWO was brought in, Stone Cold and Scott Hall were feuding with each other, and they ended up having a match at WrestleMania 18. Part of the storyline and part of the build to it, obviously we all know Stone Cold likes to drink beer. There was one point they were just dousing beer over Scott Hall's head, and then later in the show we cut to the back, and I forget, was it like almost like a walk-in? No, it was like, I think it was just like a back storage area. But Scott Hall was sit to a chair, kind of like this. And he was duct taped to the chair, and he had duct tape over his mouth, and they were just pouring beer on him. And at the time, Scott Hall was taking some type of medication to help him remain sober and to just help with shit that he had going on. And even just the smell of alcohol apparently would make him just violently ill and violently sick. So that's really shitty. And I don't know who knew what at the time, but come on. July 2002, Eric Bischoff gets a call from Vince McMahon, and Eric knew he could work for him. Eric shows up as the new Raw GM, and it was another surreal moment. Rock says he likes Eric a lot, and they're good buddies. Okay. He notes that Eric, whatever. I'm not going to get into it. He notes that Eric has, again, this makes no sense. The sentence says, he notes Eric has his bust on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling executives. Whatever. Kudos to whoever decided to put that in there. Eric loved his time in WWE, and when it was over, he was fine with it. The idea was for Cena to throw Eric in the back of a garbage truck, and so his departure from WWF. And Eric went to Vince and told him that didn't make sense. He pitched the idea that Vince should be the one to throw him into the garbage truck. He loved every minute of it, and WWE got to rewrite a new chapter. He doesn't regret a second of that run. And as we all know, Eric did get a chance to come back to WWE, I think in 2018, as a executive producer for SmackDown, and I think he only lasted like 4 months before Vince fired him. And he's gone on to admit that it just wasn't a good fit at the time, and he didn't understand exactly what Vince was looking for from him and the direction that Vince was wanting to go. And it was pretty much just like a big, I don't want to say miscommunication, but just not on the same page type thing. They go around the talking heads asking the question we have been trying to figure out for the last 4 weeks of the show: who killed WCW? Cheatham says Turner Corporate. Conan says the people in Turner that did not like wrestling and the top guys who held down the mid card. Finally, a reference to the mid card. Brad says WCW killed itself as it didn't function as a team. Makes no fucking sense. Nash has never seen someone as high up on the food chain as Brad not take responsibility, which I agree with there. He holds up an iPad with Brad talking and says, "This is what killed WCW." Medusa says they were eating their own. What the fuck does that mean? DDP says Turner Sports. Booker says the person with the checkbook, Eric Bischoff, which I don't agree with that at all. Did he have a hand into it? Most likely, yes, but he didn't fucking kill it. He built the thing. Come on. Not from the ground up, but he took it to the next level. Russo says a business decision killed WCW, which I think is a very fair point, a very fair and accurate answer amongst everyone. Like, he probably gave the best answer there. Goldberg says a shitload of people contributed to it, which again, I agree with that as well. And then The Rock, because why not have The Rock in there, of course, right? Like, he's got to be on TV. Brings up Downtown Bruno and how he told him, "One day you will hear a voice tell you the big run is over." WCW heard that voice and the big run was over, but it was fucking awesome. Fuck off, man. Like, that shit just annoys me. It's just like, why insert yourself? You weren't in WCW. Like, yes, you're $7 is producing the show and helping produce the show. I get it. Like, cool. Thank you for it. But it's like, you weren't involved. Like, why would you have an opinion on who killed WCW? Like, that'd be like asking Stone Cold who killed WCW. He doesn't fucking know. He was in WWF killing it. You were in WWF fucking killing it. So, like, yeah, I'm sure you had dream matches and stuff like that, but, like, it doesn't make sense to me. And, like, that's just always what's just kind of, like, bothered me about certain things. But, again, not going to get into that right now. But we do close with some happiness as they talk about the packed houses and the highs of the company. Medusa notes that they need to remember the lessons. The ride was fun, and they were all family, even if dysfunctional. And then they show some Nitro parties, which is pretty cool. Goldberg notes that all good things come to an end. Yeah, you would know. Ask Brett. Nash says WCW was Eric's creation, and nobody else on this planet can say that they beat Vince McMahon at pro wrestling. Facts. They have Eric watching on an iPad as Nash makes these comments, and you can see it means a lot to him. He breaks down a little and says, "Cool." Which, again, like, I don't know, man. I'm not going to go over it again, but Eric deserves a lot more respect and credit than he's given. They were, he says, we were the number one wrestling company on the television, which is what he closed with. So, he, before that, had mentioned some memories as time goes on, and that they kind of tend to blur together at some points, and then that's when he closed with saying, "We were the number one wrestling company on the television." And he says that with all the good and the bad, he was very lucky. And that was the end of the show. I'm just reading through my final notes here to see if I had anything else written down here. But yeah, so that's all my notes there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed the series. I hope that they do something again similar. I'm not really sure what it would be on. But obviously, you know, we have the Dark Side of the Ring and things like that. And to me, I watched it as it first started, but I just kind of got like a bad taste in my mouth type thing. But again, just to give a quick recap, I really enjoyed the 4-part series here. Go back to the beginning of this episode, which I'm sure at this point it's over an hour, so you're not going to want to do that. But I think that it really gave the wrestling industry a kick in the ass that it needed. And if you look back on it, I really think that if Eric Bischoff didn't do what he did and really fight to change the industry and have the support and the talent around him that he did, wrestling may not be what it is today. And it's kind of crazy when you think back on it. But with that being said, thank you guys so very much for checking out the show and for sticking with me for so long. It's over an hour here. I am going to go to sleep and get some rest before I have to wake up in a couple hours now. But I truly appreciate you guys for checking out the show here. And like I said, we'll work on something else, but I will get back to the prediction show for Forbidden Door. I'll be doing that when I get back home. So maybe Friday night, Saturday, probably Saturday morning, because I'll be traveling all day on Friday. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for checking out the show here. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at @KickashPodcast_. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. Feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already, and to drop comments there. I'm really digging the feedback and the comments that you guys are leaving, and I truly appreciate that. And the subscriptions that I'm beginning, it's just kind of cool, man. Like I said, I just come on here to vent and just kind of speak into the void, right? But it's cool to see that you guys are out there and you're digging the show and you're dropping feedback in your comments. And what is the world without discussion, right? So stay safe out there, guys. Enjoy some wrestling, and until next time, have fun.